have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Kasper Roos, founder and CEO of Aspire Customer Communication Services. And today he's going to be talking about the need for ECP, enterprise communications processing, in a time of significant change. And with that, I will turn it over to Kasper.
Thanks, Linda, and yeah, thanks for having me. It's great and a bit strange to do this in a virtual way. It's really interesting this time of year. It's always sort of, you know, conference season. I was actually supposed to be in the States for 2 weeks. I'm actually based out of Europe. I live close to Amsterdam, so my wife loves it. I miss it, not to travel, but it's great to do it this way. I actually thought I put on my suit because otherwise I would have presented in a nice way, and it sort of makes me probably feel a little bit more comfortable or more sort of, you know, normal in that sense. But yeah, I'm going to talk about this new segment in the industry which we call ECP. It's an acronym for Enterprise Communications Processing. So before I do that, I'd like to put one slide up just to introduce myself and the team a little bit. So I founded Aspire 4.5 years ago now. We're a specialist analyst firm focusing on customer communications management, and more specifically, we focus on the transition from CCM into customer experience management. So we've sort of 4 groups of clients, if you will. We work with the technology companies. We analyze them, we provide research and strategy services, we help with business development. We also work with services providers. And then on the bottom half of the circle, you see that we work with enterprises as well, where we can help with RFP, RFI support, as well as with maturity assessments. And we've got a sort of value consultancy practice there where we help enterprises to evolve from CCM into CXM. And then lastly, we also work occasionally with the investors and the M&A advisors in the space. One thing that you may be familiar with, we have a website. It's called the aspireleaderboard.com, where you can read about the vendors and the landscape. And actually today, we're launching an updated version for 2020. So you can read more information there. I also want to highlight very quickly that Will Morgan is our US-based analyst. He joined us in October. So it's great to have a US presence or someone in the States. Our revenues are sort of 50-50, so 50% from Europe, 50% from the US. So already sort of, you know, are actively involved in the States, but it's great to have him here as well. So with that, let me dive in and show you a couple of thoughts. So my thought was I'd like to start a little bit with giving you an impact or an overview of the impact that COVID-19 has on the CCM industry. So I'll talk from a slightly different angle than Matt. So it was interesting to see his sort of, you know, consumer focus. I'll come more in here from an sort of enterprise and services provider focus. We talk to many companies on a daily basis, and I've just sort of collected a few thoughts there to give you an overview and to help you with some sort of the market forces. It says that I'm muted, but I hope that is a...
You're all good now. You're all
okay, good. And then I'll dive into sort of what ECP means. All right, let's start here. Let's move to the next slide. So as an analyst, we always like to sort of present things in simple diagrams. So when this thing really sort of started, so I said the last Thursday, and it must be the first 10 days, so my apology there. It's like most people that we spoke with were saying, oh, we need to sort of enable our teams to work from home. We need to sort of enable this sort of this remote capability. And that was pretty interesting because many businesses then actually found out that it is not so simple to actually move communications or the management of communications online. So lots of questions about how can we actually get access when a lot of systems are really sort of on-prem. It's hard to sort of connect to those systems. So companies were really struggling with that. And also another thing that we saw there was people or teams or call centers, when they sort of have, when you move a call center to a home-based situation, the productivity drops significantly. So a 70% productivity drop is not uncommon. Suddenly, it's all about how do we sort of deflect that incoming call center volume or that incoming volume away from the call center. How can we actually do that online? And that's sort of when I move to the next point there, the sort of current thing is where lots of businesses are saying, okay, what can we do here? What can we deploy from a sort of inbound automation perspective to do that? So we're seeing quite a bit of focus on deploying web forms, very sort of, easy to deploy when you've got the right software. You can create a web form, you run it in the cloud, it can sort of, scale pretty much infinitely. So those type of sort of modern cloud-based systems are very useful at this sort of at this time. If I go back, sorry, to the first bullet points there, bring your own device review speaks for itself. Enabling people to work on their own devices, but then also the incident response communications. Again, what Matt was showing in his keynote was pretty interesting. Every company we've ever dealt with have sent a communication. So this was sort of the initial response, and I'll show you a couple of statistics here that I've collected from the industry in terms of those trends. Then if I move to what companies are doing now, so moving a lot of stuff online, that's definitely happening at accelerated pace. We've been talking to insurance companies that are very slow to move traditionally, are now suddenly saying, oh, we need to do something with mobile, with text messaging, because what if the postal system shuts down? What if we cannot communicate with them through email because some of those people are not really responsive to email? Can we sort of send them text messages because people tend to respond to those? So there's a whole shift there very rapidly happening. Another thing that's very interesting, I think, is this business contingency planning reviews. So this is stuff that is top of mind for many businesses now, to sort of say, okay, we've sort of, we've come through the first couple of weeks or the first few weeks now, the first sort of, 6-8 weeks. And now suddenly let's sort of take a moment to think through what actually went wrong and what can we learn from this. And what if some of our key sort of, outsourcers are down, and are we able to switch to another ones? Do they actually have the right BCP processes in place? Nobody was really sort of expecting this. To a large extent, we're all being caught off guard. So that is really sort of something now that is starting to get more attention. And I think there are two things here that I'm seeing. One, depending on the country, there's a little bit more shift to outsourcing of print communications, at least what I'm seeing, where people are saying, if we're still print ourselves, if this stuff really sort of, we sort of review this, maybe it makes sense to put this in the hand of sort of professional outsourcers who've got multiple sites, can deal with this, have much stronger business contingency plans in place than we actually can. But then some countries have already outsourced this to a very large extent, and for them it's more like, okay, what can we do to actually sort of, switch? Some things that we're seeing as well, and this is on the digital side, that some companies are now saying, well, actually, this could pose a risk. So from a digital perspective, we actually want to bring composition back in-house, that we own that, and that we can be completely in control there and not dependent on an outsourcer. So we've seen some of those dynamics play out in recent weeks. Another thing that clients tell us is that they've been setting up COVID-19 war rooms. So those are cross-functional teams that control the messaging. Again, something that Matt mentioned really resonated when he said that direct mail was being put on hold. It's one of the things that we've seen is that quite a number of enterprises that had marketing campaigns in place suddenly said, ooh, this thing is so important and it really starts affecting the market so much. People are really sort of being impacted negatively. We don't think that our current campaigns are right in terms of tone of voice and empathy, and we need to sort of put it on hold. We need to review if, given the current situation, it's still appropriate to send them out. So big polls, big sort of, lots of people put the brakes on. We saw that for advertising in television, but also for direct mail. So looking forward, what's going to happen in my perspective, a really strong push to digital transformation, and I'll talk about that later in my slides, a redefinition about sort of insourcing, outsourcing, and really looking into sort of how can we leverage communications to build a better customer experience. I think this is ultimately going to be a very important driver. For some industries like insurance, I think this is going to be a key one. So when we remember the 2008, 2009 financial crash, the banks really sort of felt that this was on them. So many consumers really responded negatively to banks and said, well, you guys sort of, caused this mess. Now you're still starting to pay out these huge bonuses. We're not happy with that. And one of the responses that the banks basically took to a large extent was to say, okay, we're going to really invest in digital transformation and to improve the customer experience. And by doing that, they really sort of, up their game. And if you basically look at any data now on digital transformation adoption, what you would find is that financial services companies tend to be ahead of the game, because since 2008, 2009, they've poured billions of dollars into sort of investing in better systems. My sense is that this time around, it could be the insurance companies. It depends a little bit, depends on how strictly they're going to sort of deal with claims. But if they're saying, well, COVID-19 is a force majeure, an act of God, and it means that that we can actually use the fine print and we're not going to pay out those claims, it could massively backfire on them. And it could be a real pressure to improve the customer experience here and to regain the trust of the consumer. So with that, let's dive in a couple of slides here. This one is from Quadient. It's interesting. They have a cloud solution that sort of manages their email across all their client base. This is two slides or two sort of trajectories here. The 2019 one is their email, cloud-based email, or the emails that basically go through the cloud system. 2020 is projected there. You can sort of see the trend line, and then in March was a 30% jump compared to the to the trend line. And the expectation here, or the assumption here, is that this is caused by COVID-19, that many businesses said, we need to send some extra communication out, we'll do that digitally. So we already see that shift really happening. Unfortunately, we don't know what the print impact is, but you can assume that sort of stayed stable of decreased a little bit. This statistic here, this is interesting stuff. This comes from Spark Post. If you're not familiar with Spark Post, they are a leading email gateway services provider. So they manage, they send out those emails, so you can connect a composition system to them, and they send it out, and they deal with the smart or the blacklist and all that stuff. They send out 40% of global emails, so they're a massive player in the space. They were kind enough to send me a few statistics. So what you can see here, this is travel and hospitality. No surprise, the first week that COVID-19 really hit the market, big decline in emails in the travel and hospitality industries. Same on events, very similar. Very sort of, that industry has come to a virtual standstill. That's why we're doing this today. So it's only logical that you can see that reflected in those emails. Funnily enough, there are some industries that benefit from this as well. So restaurants and food delivery services in particular saw a big jump when people were saying, oh, we're now going to actually order food online. We want to help the restaurants a little bit. I mean, we'll see some of that sentiment. It depends, of course, if you can still have a job. But that's a big jump there. But also charities actually noticed an increase in communications. So that was another one that jumped there. Social media was up, personal email was up. So there are a number of those sort of segments where we could actually see the impact, not negative, but more from a sort of positive number of emails perspective. So all in all, I think the market is really sort of trying to understand what is the new normal. One of the things that we found as well is this is the slide from Pitney, which is interesting as well, is that they sell a chatbot solution. They've tracked their sort of regular sales, and then you could see that in April they basically had 5x higher interest than normal based on what they were expecting or seeing sort of normally. And they expected sort of to continue to further increase over the next couple of months. So what I said before, companies are really actively looking at using chatbots and sort of, services automation there, or automation for services, customer service, to take that sort of pressure away from the call center and to deal with a lot of that stuff more automatically. So with that, let's sort of switch gears a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about what ECP means and how we can tie this to some of the developments that we were already seeing in the market. And it doesn't really come as a surprise that when we look at the market, we already saw a big shift to digital transformation. And COVID-19, in my mind, is really sort of accelerating that. So first, enterprise communication priorities are shifting from cost and risk to increasing business value. So this is a main driver that's been going on for a number of years now, where companies are no longer, cost is always important, but depending on the buyer, it may not be the decisive factor anymore. Some buyers are saying, well, we're making or building our business case around what is sort of, the upsell or the cross-sell or the retention that we can obtain by sort of doing this. What if we take this legacy print piece and we convert it into an HTML5 form that drives more, upsell, cross-sell? That's sort of a key factor to do that. So it's a shift in mindset that is very clearly, if you basically look at market research data, a couple of years ago, or maybe 5-10 years ago, the main cost driver was sort of, the main business driver or the main investment driver was IT cost. That is somewhat shifting more to the business side. The other thing is the technology landscape is rapidly changing, so I'll talk about that as well. And then we also see a shift to more from sort of install, on-prem install to more cloud-based distribution. And that actually really sort of, shifts the whole landscape as well. So let me sort of explore this in a little bit more detail before we sort of look at what it means from an omni-channel and an enterprise communication processing perspective. So first of all, this is a statistic that a research that we did and a few months ago, end of September 2019, so it's half a year ago now. We asked, or 3/4 of a year, so we asked 512 enterprises, what is it that your C-suite is really looking at? So what are your top corporate priorities that you are currently wrestling with or working on? And what we found was that for the first time, I think, because traditionally you would see digital transformation sort of top the list, for the first time, we saw that customer experience was really the top driver here. It was very interesting to see that. So customer experience and omni-channel comms were really sort of, top priorities here. If you look at sort of digital transformation came in third. Now, it may change a little bit now at this time with COVID-19. My sense is that digital transformation would probably be pushed a little bit higher. But the omni-channel comms for me is really interesting, because what it tells me is that many businesses have started to collect data. They've started to collect really good insights about their customers, and they need to use them now. They really want to say, okay, what can we do to improve how we communicate and how we interact with them? And that's a sort of core focus area nowadays for many businesses. So what does that mean in practice? You may have seen this model before. I love this model because it really shows how businesses are starting to think more holistically about their communication. So when you go to enterprises that are more on the mature end of the CX spectrum, what you would find is that they have grouped CCM under their customer experience management teams. They are starting to look more holistically across the customer lifecycle value or lifecycle stages. And what I've started to do is to say, well, what are the different communications that we are sending out, and how can we combine those communications together to improve the consistency, to improve the frequency, or to make sure that we align them. We did an assessment recently with an energy company in Europe, and we found that they sent 4 different welcome email or welcome communications separately. they weren't aware of that. It's because they have 4 different systems, 4 different trigger points in the journey, and not someone being responsible or some team being responsible for the overarching coordination here. So the idea here is that businesses can sort of develop those customer journeys, can sort of look at all those sort of life cycle stages, whether it's finding customers, selling to them, onboarding those customers, then sending the first bill. There could be customer services requests, and then finally sort of, communications around engagement and upsell and cross-sell. So the point here is companies are starting to look at this more holistically. So whether you are a services provider only focusing on the billing aspect, whether you're an implant only dealing with maybe some renewal communications, or again some transactional billing, or whether you're on the marketing side and looking at this more holistically, I think there's a real sort of recognition that more value can be obtained by coordinating all those different touch points. And our research has shown that companies that do this well are able to grow revenue 41% faster than businesses who are not taking this perspective. So there's a real sort of push in the market to start sort of looking at this. And all the things that we're seeing now is sort of building to those things. So even sort of the legacy communications, they need to be unlocked, because marketers are saying we cannot send old school black and white sort of printed pieces to our customers who are saying to us, we want to get this digitally, or we want to sign them digitally. They have a real need to sort of upgrade and modernize and put them into this sort of CX mind frame. And with that, what we're seeing is that companies are saying we need to digitize more our back office processes. We really need to start doing that. We need to apply AI to optimize the process, AI-based migration, content migration, AI-based sort of analysis. Corvot actually has a really interesting tool where they can auto-annotate sort of PDFs and make them available for sort of accessibility purposes. But that type of technology is very useful in this process here, to sort of take that, automate it, and then enhance the value from a CX perspective. And then the last thing here, or just to build up on sort of that cloud message, is if you look at what happened to print over the last 2 decades, it's not a very nice picture, actually. If we all come from sort of this print background, we sort of like print in many ways. At the same time, we need to sort of realize that the market is moving away from it. And we're seeing here on the left-hand side, you can see over the last 20 years, the postal volume, this is first-class addressed mail. In the US, I think that's the dark blue one. It sort of dropped just below I think it's sort of around the 50%. So 50% of volume has been lost over the last 2 decades. If you look at a country like Denmark, it's less than 20% of volume. They lost over 80%. And the trend is very sort of clear. I mean, Germany is the exception here, but the trend is trending downwards. It's only a matter of time. So there is a further, I expect a further sort of decline there for everyone that's still in sort of that 50-60% range. We're seeing sort of the electronic signatures market now growing very, very rapidly. It's becoming an $8 billion market over the next couple of years, pushing more contracts. Our research indicated minus 30% print migration related to printed contracts. So it's just shifting more to the marketing side. And if you look at the marketing technology stack on the right, that's pretty impressive. In 2011, we had 150 digital marketing technology vendors. Right now, we've got over 7,000. And that market is going to consolidate at some point, there's no doubt. At the same time, what we're seeing is that a lot of enterprises are saying, we cannot deal with all those different point systems. We have to move to platforms because we cannot sort of justify dealing with all those different sort of solutions. We've got to sort of make it more, just have a sort of better grip on that stuff. So I think there's a need for services providers that understand the space, can work with best-in-class technology, can help organizations really sort of pick the best-in-class software, and can tie it all together. And I think this is sort of what is happening now, where we see a lot of software being moved to the cloud. The marketing technology stack is already mainly on the cloud. Application integration becoming much more important. And with that, we're seeing much more targeted communication, hyper-personalized at times. And that's the transition the market is heading to. So it's a fundamental time of change being accelerated by COVID-19. So the question that it leads to then is, what does that mean from an enterprise communication processing perspective? Because if you're in this market, and let's assume here that you're an implant manufacturer, excuse me, an implant manager, you're a services provider, or you're someone who sort of works a little bit more on the sort of output side of the and downstream sort of processing side. So let me show you a few ideas of where this market, I think, is, and we think as an analyst firm, are going to sort of move to. So before I do that, I think it is helpful to show you a little bit a technical slide about how the market or the technology landscape is changing as well. If you follow some of my work, you may have seen this slide before, but I do think it's very relevant to sort of show it here. And what we've seen from a CCM perspective is that the focus of composition is shifting away more to the orchestration and more to sort of the orchestration, and I think that's probably the best word, moving away to sort of helping to understand what needs to be sent at what moment in time to what customer. And the way enterprises are starting to do that is to look at a integration layer. So I call that an iPaaS, an integration platform as a service. There are many different solutions out there in the market. Some enterprises are building this themselves. Others are using more general sort of iPaaS solutions. There are some CCM vendor-specific iPaaS solutions. There could be all kind of sort of, there are different sort of solutions out there that could be used there. But the point is, those solutions are typically optimized to connect, so they're very good at connecting into some of those different systems that are out there. So for example, if you want to connect to a Salesforce, an iPaaS solution would typically have that, that sort of connector, and it's a very sort of quick configuration. So typically what we're seeing is that a lot of those connectors are being made available on a cloud-based exchange. As an IT user or as a technical business user, you can sort of select and download and connect and sort of configure that. So from that perspective, it's a sort of quick and easy way to sort of do that. So this integration layer connects to all those different sort of core systems or marketing systems or back office systems, whatever sort of those systems are, including legacy solutions that are still out there that can be sort of ingest that content, or scanning systems, or even social media listening. The point here is those communications, that interactions are tagged, and they're being stored in a big data lake. So again, they can use systems off the shelf, they can build their own. Hadoop is very often used there, what I see in the market. But then the point is, once you sort of start tracking those communications, you can separate the delivery from the orchestration. And that is something that is really starting to take place now. So on the delivery side, this is more the traditional, I would say, CCM market, the more sort of mature composition market. So you have a content automation, there's some content services, there's a template, there's an interactive user that can change those templates on the fly. That can be then sent to an omni-channel output, which can then either send it to a gateway. So this is where it could be sent to a print company or to an email services provider like SparkPost that I mentioned before. It can send to a customer self-service portal. And then up there, it could sort of, fed back into sort of mobile apps and other types of sort of systems there. So this is the traditional CCM sort of composition play, if you will. Now, where Crawford typically plays is a little bit more on the sort of gateway there with specific sort of point solutions, but they're moving more into that platform approach. So this is what I'll show in the next slides, but just to give you a bit of framework there. Then if you move on the left-hand side, this is where vendors in the space and outside of the space are starting to sort of, move to, where they are looking at sort of analytics, recommendation engines that can be applied to that big data, to those data points, channel preferences, more dynamic. Again, what Matt was saying earlier in his keynote about customers now saying, ask me about my channel preferences. I would say the next question is, you don't want to ask them all those things. You just want to be, you want to sort of intelligently guess it. And if you ask 1,000 consumers and you really understand who those consumers are, you can be pretty certain that those preferences applied to all the other ones that are out there. So I think it's a matter of sort of figuring out how can we use technology to sort of be smarter about what we know about certain customers, and then apply that logic and scale it up to a wider sort of audience. Workflow, same thing here. Nowadays, workflow, we make it available to technical business users using drag and drop software. They can change that over time. My expectation is that we'll see more AI coming into there and really sort of evolving that. And then to close the loop here, we're seeing more BI tools, journey mapping tools, where CX users, customer experience professionals, marketers can really sort of see all those interaction points and touch points, and can sort of know where the experience is broken. They can annotate those touch points and say to the designers, this is what needs to be fixed, this is what you need to do. So this sort of framework, this sort of concept is becoming more adopted in the market. And what is happening for the services providers here is that they need to sort of connect into that new mindset, into that new system. And this is why they're developing new type of solutions. And we've called those ECP solutions. It's a solution framework that really helps the high volume print production facilities control, process, deliver print and digital customer communications while meeting security and regulatory requirements. So this is super important, because if you leave it up to the marketers and the CX professionals, compliance comms will be a nightmare. That's not their forte. That's not their background. They have to sort of have the the back office guys sort of really sort of step in and say, this is not something that you can send out without having the proper safeguards and controls in place. And I'll show you an example, a real life example that we saw at a large bank. So what is happening is that those services providers and those, more, I would say, the more visionary sort of implants, but I see this a little bit more, the enterprises, the services providers, sorry, the BPOs, the print technology, the print services companies, they are moving a lot of their workflow technology into the cloud. And they're building they're using an integration framework, an API services bus in essence, to connect to either composition solutions at the enterprise, more upstream, or even directly into sort of some of those core systems. And then their platform enables them to process those, and they can do sort of normalization. It could be aggregation. It could be on the outbound side, postal sortation, output management capability, print optimization. A lot of that stuff has been out there for many years. But the point here is what is really new is that they're taking a more holistic perspective and are building dashboards to give end customers insights into that process. And that's really key, because lots of enterprises are saying, we want to have much more granular insights. We really want to understand, what are we sending out? Now with COVID-19, are we able to actually hit the stop button if we need to do that? We talked to an enterprise in recent weeks, and a healthcare insurance company. Took them 4 weeks to sort of do that. And they were extremely scrambling at this time now, or normally it would take them 4 weeks, and really scrambling to sort of do that and really sort of adjust or come up with those specific COVID-19 messages. So that's sort of what is happening here, how does that connect to this picture? You'll probably ask yourself, because you're saying, well, we're a print company, print facility, we just print, we get print, we can send some stuff digitally, and that's what we do. That's absolutely fine, but those type of solutions I'm talking about allow you to actually go beyond that. So typically, I would say the integration here, typically for ECP now or ADF type sort of solution, is you grab that out from a composition system, you add your print marks and your inserter code, and you sort of produce it. I think the next step here is to say, can we actually grab some of that sort of, digital communications that actually have a compliance requirement, need to be archived, need to be sent, or we need to be able to send them to print if needed, if the client can actually, if the customers cannot be reached. How do we do that? And I'll give you that example that I mentioned about that large bank. So it's a UK household bank. It's a top 10 bank, very well-known name in the market here in the UK. What they did, and this is fundamentally, it's not a problem. It's actually a good thing to move the customer services team under marketing, because they were saying we need to become much more customer friendly. We need to move the customer services guys under the responsibility of the marketing team, because the marketing team is much more focused on upsell, cross-sell, retention. So this company in particular was scoring a little bit low in terms of upsell compared to the rest of the financial services market. So they felt that compared to their peers, this was an area that they had to improve. So they said, let's group customer service under marketing. What happened next was that when it comes to communications, they then were using the marketing tech tools. So again, not a surprise, but then here's where the issue came, because they had to send a price update, and they sent this digital price update, and they were using Adobe Campaign for this. Now, Adobe Campaign, if you're not familiar, it's a marketing automation solution. It's really good into sort of creating nice emails. You can sort of, see what's going on from a marketing perspective. It's automated, so you can segment. So there's a lot of functionality there from an orchestration perspective. But the only thing Adobe Campaign is really not good at is testing, tracking for print, sending it to sort of, the archive, and to really deal with the regulatory sort of aspects. That's not the main point of an Adobe Campaign solution. So what was needed here, and this is where ECP would be a sort of ideal sort of solution, is that company was really looking for a tool that could ingest that output. There are multiple ways of solving this problem, by the way, but this was sort of, a sort of suggested approach here, where you say, well, let's sort of, ingest that communication into your ECP platform. Don't let sort of Adobe send it out immediately. Let's sort of ingest it in a proper workflow solution. Let's figure out if the email cannot be delivered, if that cannot be done because the inbox is full or people are not sort of responding to that. Let's then sort of trigger a print communication. Let's put it in the archive so we're compliant. We can have, the auditor is happy, visibility into the process. We can provide those dashboards. People can see what's going on, and we're compliant with GDPR and other sort of types of requirements there. And the question then is like, why using an ECP solution and not a composition tool? Now, sometimes that doesn't really work practically, because they can have already multiple tools. It could take a long time to do that, maybe too expensive, too long to implement, all kind of reasons. So this could be one area where a services provider could go in and sort of offer that service. So this is one. Another couple of really relevant use cases here is legacy print to HTML5 migration. So this is another thing. When you offer a platform, you're much more flexible to really listen to what your customer needs, and then offer the solution based on what the requirements are. And you can plug in the specific component. So legacy print to HTML5 is a really big deal at the moment. There's lots of legacy printed pieces that need to be extracted from that archive, being sort of modernized, and putting it sort of on the web or in a mobile app, enabling customers to really have that bi-directional interaction, making sure it can all be tracked, that people really, from an enterprise perspective, can see what's going on. Rerouting capabilities, multi-site print management, another thing that's really coming up now, where companies are saying we want to be able to swap if something happens and the print side is down. Can we actually move them over or move our communications to another provider without dealing with sort of very specific print code that one particular print company has put in there? So that's another sort of major selling point. Start-stop capabilities, we talked about it. Integration with mobile text messaging. The use cases are quite large. There are a number of them, but those are a few that we've seen sort of in recent weeks sort of pop up a bit because of COVID-19. So with that, I think I'm almost sort of at the end of my allocated time. I just want to highlight that we are launching the updated leaderboard today. Crawford is a leader in the ECP space. I just want to sort of highlight that. One of the things that we really liked about Crawford is their move to more platforms. So the output management platform for managing sort of print communications, using sort of different components there to sort of enhance that, having that sort of framework and dashboarding capabilities. Their eDelivery Now platform to do that more on the digital side. So not only for print companies, but also to move more to the digital, what I mentioned before, to offering those type of capabilities. And then accessibility now, it's something I didn't really sort of talk about a lot. We are seeing an increase in that sort of space where people are looking for solutions that can actually be optimized for people that are visually impaired, Braille, text to voice, all those things. The ability to sort of ingest that document that I mentioned before, tag it automatically, making it available for that text to voice or the Braille systems and other sort of, large fonts or whatever the needs are that you can support them. With that, my last slide here before I open it up for a few questions. What does that mean for you? If you're on the enterprise side, you offer, you're an implant provider, implant manager, or a director, or you manage a print services company. I think the opportunity here very clearly is you need to think beyond the printed services, and we've been saying that for many years, you know that. But the technology allows you to actually do that now. So I think this is a core change compared to a few years ago. Now all that stuff is moving to the cloud. Companies are becoming much more open to cloud-based services. They are looking for experts in this field that can help them, guide them through the transformation. And there is an opportunity, I think, to move more upstream and to say, look, you can put all that stuff in the hands of the marketers, but at the same time, there has to be a need. There is a need for compliance, for security, for visibility into what really is going on. And you need to do something there, connect the two worlds together. If you can do that, I think you can position yourself as a trusted advisor. You can provide more insights. You can become this consultative sort of, salesperson there that can be highly valuable. I had a person in my session, a document strategy forum. I think it was last year or the year before, and that was really interesting because he was saying that their CEO has started to say that they are an omni-channel company, and they can communicate to every sort of or channel that their customers really want. And this guy was responsible for CCM, and he said to me, "Look, we really cannot. We have aspirations in this area, but our CEO is actually a few steps too far ahead of the game." But what I'm doing now, because he's talking about this so passionately, I've built my own business plan. I have the investments, or I know where I want to invest. And the moment other people in the organizations are starting to freak out because we are not, he said, I'm ready to take this opportunity and to jump on it. And I thought that's really, really good. So he has sort of started to align himself to corporate initiatives and prepared and be ready for when that sort of thing comes. So companies that have sort of made that initial sort of step to digital, I think they're much more capable or stronger position now during COVID-19 to actually benefit from that. Others will come. So with that, I hope you find this interesting. As always, feel free to contact if you want to discuss or you have questions, or if you want to get access to the deck, that's all perfectly fine. And with that, Linda, back over to you for any Q&A. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kasper. That was a fantastic presentation. We do have a couple of questions that have come through. Let me go ahead. So how do ECP vendors differ from composition vendors?
Right. Yeah. So composition vendors, they tend to play a little bit more upstream with that. I mean, they tend to sort of sell a little bit more into the line of business. When you look at sort of ECP providers are a little bit more focused on sort of output and sort of the processing and the print production, as well as some of the high volume digital production. Another key area typically is that the composition vendors focus a little bit more on interactive. So the ability for let's say an insurance company to make some claims changes on the fly in real time. So there are some nuances there, but I think the processing aspect is traditionally a little bit more sort of downstream. And if you compare a processing provider, ECP provider, to a composition provider, what you would find is that composition providers typically lack that sort of end-to-end processing capabilities. They don't offer dashboards and insights and those things. That's typically not their strength. They focus a little bit more on what I said, the interactive type sort of use cases.
Great, that makes sense. Excellent. And I think we have time for one more. Um, as a service provider, where should I start with ECP?
Yeah, so I would say always, really always start with the customer in mind. That's so important nowadays. So I would highly recommend you, whether you're internal or external, in terms of like an implant versus an external services provider, pick a few customers that you trust, that you know have a need for more digital, are wrestling with this, and sort of, do the journey together and say, look, the technology is evolving. We can work with trusted technology partners. We can take them on the journey as well, and we can come up with something that is really valuable here. And the moment you start doing that, I think it could be highly beneficial. And many businesses are at this sort of early in this transition. So the objections that we typically get is like, oh, we don't have that experience, or our sales guys are not good enough. I think a lot of those things can be overcome, and we've seen some success there by just sort of saying, okay, let's take small step first. Let's sort of work with a trusted client. Let's sort of figure this stuff out, make some incremental sort of changes, and then sort of figure out, okay, what is it that we need to really scale this up?
Great, excellent. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
We appreciate your participation in the event today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our next presenter.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kasper.